My grandfather's family tradition exiled my cousin. When I tried to expose him, he framed me for trying to poison the entire family. He thought he had me trapped, but he didn't know I had a secret ally who knew where all the bodies were buried. In my family, all the children had to follow one rule: create a masterpiece or be cast out. You see, every autumn, all my cousins between the ages of 16 and 21 would gather in my grandfather's winery for the culling. Two cousins presented their unique, handcrafted wine. Only the one whose creation was deemed worthy by my grandfather got to remain in the family business for the next year. They called it strengthening the vine through pruning. My grandfather started this tradition after building his wine empire from nothing. The world is full of mediocrity, he'd tell us, his cold eyes scanning our faces. No grandchild of mine will be weak. My uncles enforced the rules with pride. Uncle Marcus kept a cellar of his winning vintages, bottles from the years his cousins were exiled in disgrace. So when I turned 16, I spent my birthday standing in the cold, damp cellar for the first time, surrounded by cousins nursing old rivalries. I tried to tell myself it wouldn't be that bad, that I could just focus on my craft and pretend it wasn't a competition. Boy, was I wrong. Turns out it wasn't just about winning. The loser was publicly shamed, their wine poured onto the ground. They were given a bus ticket and $1,000, then driven to the edge of the property and told never to return. Winners were celebrated like kings, while losers were erased from the family photos. Cousins competed against cousins. Fathers placed bets. The first harvest is always special, Uncle David announced, pushing me toward the tasting table. My opponent, my cousin Isabella, also 16, also terrified. The men formed a wall around us, chanting, "The vine must be strong," over and over. Isabella and I presented our wines, neither of us wanting to see the other fail. "Hers is weak," my father screamed after tasting Isabella's rose. So they chose me. I won. That night, I sat at the celebratory dinner while Isabella packed her bags, her sobs echoing from the room upstairs. The months that followed broke something in all of us. My 18-year-old brother, Leo, nearly had a nervous breakdown trying to perfect his Chardonnay, competing against our cousin Eva. Another cousin, Daniel, once the kindest kid, learned to sabotage his rivals, adding too much yeast to their barrels, ruining their fermentation. "Got to survive," he'd say afterward, his hands stained with grapes. By my third culling, I'd won every time. Not because I was ruthless, but because I was good. I hated who I was becoming. And our valley was so small that over half the town worked for our vineyard. So, they made sure no questions got asked. I knew if I didn't find an escape soon, then my life would be over. But I wanted the problem to go away by itself. And one day, I thought of a solution. We were learning about noble rot, a type of fungus that could either create a delicious dessert wine or, if mishandled, ruin a vintage completely. That was my light bulb moment. I cultivated a small amount of the wrong kind of rot. So, by the time my fourth culling came around, I was ready. My opponent was my younger brother, Leo, who was gentle and loved growing grapes, but had no talent for the ruthless art of winemaking. When the time came, I presented my botrytized wine. "It's sour," Uncle David shouted. "She's ruined it." I had lost. I would be exiled, but Leo would be safe. I went to my room to pack, and for the first time, I wasn't mad about it. Instead, I focused on my escape. I had saved money from my winnings over the years. I would be okay. Everything was going smoothly until my grandfather stormed into my room. "Where is the rest of it?" he asked, his face a mask of fury. "The rest of what?" "The rot. How did you cultivate it so fast?" The room went silent, and I pretended to find a speck of dust on my suitcase. We thought he'd forget about it, but he didn't. And the next day, everything changed. They searched my room, my lab, my section of the vineyard. When they found the hidden cultures of botrytis I'd been experimenting with, my grandfather made an example of me. He accused me of trying to destroy not just my vintage, but the entire harvest. An act of corporate sabotage. My cousin Stefan, my fiercest rival, was the one who found the evidence. "She's next," my father promised me that night. "Compete like a true heir, or I'll show you what real pruning means." I didn't say a word before pulling out my phone. I've been documenting this tradition for years. Every coerced competition, every exiled cousin, it's all uploaded to a cloud drive that the Wine Growers Association and the authorities already have access to. Every word of what I said was a lie, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they stopped with the accusations. "We're done being pruned for you," my brother Leo announced, his voice shaking but firm. Stefan was already on a call. "Security, we need help in the main house. Industrial sabotage in progress." The winery erupted into chaos. Grandfather's hands trembled as he reached for Stefan's phone, but my cousin yanked it away, backing toward the door. The distant whine of security vehicles made everyone freeze. "You're bluffing, girl," Grandfather said, his cold eyes fixed on me. His hands shook as he gestured for everyone to stay calm, but I saw the fear creeping into his weathered face. Father lunged toward me, but Leo and another cousin stepped between us. "This ends tonight, Uncle," my cousin said, his voice steady despite everything. I forced myself to maintain the lie, even as my voice cracked. "Check your emails at midnight. Everything goes live. Years of evidence." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my chin up, meeting Grandfather's stare. A small gasp came from the corner. My 8-year-old cousin, Miguel, was huddled behind a wine barrel, holding his dad's phone up, recording everything. The red light blinked like an accusation. Uncle Marcus snatched the phone from Miguel's tiny hands, his thick fingers fumbling with the screen as he deleted the video. But Miguel whispered something that made Marcus's face drain of color. "It's already live streaming to Mom's account." The security team arrived, their sirens suddenly cutting out. Stefan's panic call had been a bluff. The room exhaled collectively, but their relief was too visible, too guilty. "Family meeting now inside the house," Grandfather commanded, his authority reasserting itself. He pointed at Daniel. "Check the vineyards. Make sure they're really gone. Nobody leaves until we settle this." We filed into the main house like prisoners. The mothers emerged from the kitchen, confusion shifting to horror as they took in the tension. They'd known about the culling, pretended not to see, but the accusation of sabotage was news to some of them. My mother's face crumpled when she saw the fear in Leo's eyes. "I thought it was just a competition," she said, but her voice broke on the lie she'd been telling herself for years. Grandfather stood at the head of the dining table, the same table where winners were celebrated while losers were forgotten. "Anyone who walks out that door tonight is dead to this family. No inheritance, no help, nothing." 3 mothers were already gathering their children. Purses half-packed, car keys jingling. My Aunt Catherine held her twin boys close, both due for their first culling next year. Uncle David moved to block the front door, his bulk filling the frame. "Nobody's going anywhere until we know what evidence actually exists. This could ruin all of us." During the standoff, Leo caught my eye and showed me his phone screen. He'd been recording audio for the past hour. The battery indicator showed 2%. My stomach dropped. Our only real evidence was dying in his hand. Then the lights went out. Daniel had reached the breaker box. In the sudden darkness, furniture crashed and adults shouted. Someone's elbow caught me in the ribs as bodies collided in the confusion. The cellar window, Leo hissed in my ear. 5 of us scrambled through the small window while our fathers cursed and stumbled in the dark. We hit the ground running, splitting up without discussion. The younger boys headed for my friend Chloe's house 3 blocks over. Leo, another cousin, and I ran toward the 24-hour diner on the main road. My cousin's house was closer, so we tried there first. His mother answered the door in her robe, face pinched with worry. Behind her, I could see his father's silhouette in the hallway. "Your grandfather already called," she said, not meeting our eyes. "Get away from here. Now." The door slammed in our faces. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts flooded in. Threats from uncles, pleas from mothers asking if we were safe, demands from fathers wanting our location. Each message made my hands shake harder. At the diner, we barely ordered when the manager approached our booth. "Your grandfather called. Said you kids are runaways. I need to call the police." The security camera's red light blinked above us like Miguel's phone had. We left our untouched food and ran again. Desperate, I called Ms. Albright, my literature teacher. She answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep. When I explained, she agreed to meet us at the school. Something in her tone seemed off, but I was too desperate to question it. She was waiting in the parking lot when we arrived, but she wasn't alone. Principal Thompson stood beside her, arms crossed. "Your family's worried sick," Ms. Albright said, not meeting my eyes. She called them first. Of course she had. Half the school staff was related to us somehow. We bolted through the gymnasium, but Leo twisted his ankle jumping the chain link fence. His cry of pain echoed across the empty basketball court. Now we had to move slower, supporting him between us. Dawn came with nowhere safe to go. My bank card got declined at 3 different ATMs. Grandfather had already made his calls, closed ranks overnight. Leo's phone finally died, taking our only recording with it. The local morning news played on a TV in a shop window. Police are searching for several runaway teens from a concerned local family, the anchor said. I recognized her. She was my grandmother's hairdresser's daughter. Maybe if we apologize, my cousin suggested, exhaustion making him sway on his feet. My younger cousin, Sam, had joined us during the night. He pulled up his shirt, showing fresh bruises across his ribs. This is what happened after you left. Dad gave me a lesson about family loyalty. I made a decision. I'll go to the police alone. You guys find somewhere to hide. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment. I barely started explaining when I saw Uncle Marcus through the glass partition, filing a missing persons report at the next desk. The officer behind the glass partition glanced between Uncle Marcus and me, her expression shifting from boredom to confusion. She held up a finger, signaling me to wait, then buzzed me through to a small interview room that reeked of stale cigarettes and cleaning solution. 20 minutes passed before a detective entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a notepad. He set 1 cup in front of me, then settled into the metal chair across the table. His wedding ring clinked against the table as he opened his notepad. Your uncle says you've been having some troubles at home, he began, his voice neutral. Want to tell me your side? I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, gathering courage. The words tumbled out. The cellar, the culling, the sabotage, the hunger for acceptance. The detective's pen moved across the page, but his expression grew increasingly skeptical as I spoke. When I finished, he sat down his pen and leaned back. So, you're telling me your grandfather makes you kids compete? Like a winemaking club? Not a club. I corrected, frustration building. A competition, until someone is exiled. Kids get disowned if they lose. He rubbed his temple, then called in his partner, a man whose nameplate caught the fluorescent light. The moment the partner heard my story, his face hardened into something I recognized too well. Listen, kid, the partner said, crossing his arms. These old country families have different ways. My own grandfather used to make us compete in farming. It's not abuse. It's tradition. You can't just call it abuse because you don't like it. My protests fell on deaf ears. Within an hour, they released me to Uncle Marcus's custody. Granddad chaired the local wine growers association and had loaned half the town money, so favors were effortless. The ride home stretched endlessly. Uncle Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he made promises about grandfather's mercy if I just recanted. We passed my cousin's house. His family's car was gone, the driveway empty. Back home, grandfather had transformed into the concerned patriarch. He sat in his leather chair, surrounded by my aunts and uncles, playing the worried elder to perfection. Winemakers compete, he told the room, shaking his head sadly. It's natural. This one has imagination problems. Too much time with those literature people. The next morning, a social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman who interviewed me with my entire family present. Grandfather sat beside me, his hand heavy on my shoulder, while my parents flanked me on the other side. Every question she asked got filtered through the weight of their presence. Has anyone ever hurt you? She asked, pen poised over her clipboard. Grandfather's fingers tightened imperceptibly on my shoulder. My mother's foot tapped against mine under the table. Once, twice a warning. No, I heard myself say. Just normal family stuff. The social worker left with promises to follow up, but we all knew she wouldn't. The system was overwhelmed, and we looked like a close-knit family dealing with a rebellious teenager. That night, I lay awake planning. The old ledgers, the ones from before my grandfather took over, still existed somewhere. While the house slept, I crept to grandfather's study and lifted his car keys from the hook by the door. My hands shook like his hat in the cellar, trembling with the weight of what I was about to do. His study smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. I searched methodically, checking drawers, shelves, the closet. Finally, behind a row of accounting books, I found it. A hidden safe. I didn't have the combination. Looking for something? My mother stood in the doorway, her robe tied tight around her thin frame. In the moonlight, I could see how much weight she'd lost recently, her cheekbones sharp under papery skin. Mom, I need those ledgers, the real ones. She closed the door behind her, moving to sit on the ottoman near me. I know about the sabotage, she said quietly. I've known all along. But what choice do I have? Leave with nothing? Your father lost his job 3 months ago. Your grandfather pays our mortgage. Your sister's school tuition. Everything. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. So we just keep getting pruned. You play along until you're 21, she said, not meeting my eyes. Then you leave. That's what survivors do. Saturday approached with the inevitability of a funeral. Grandfather announced a special reculling for my return, promising the family would see me properly educated. The other escaped cousins had trickled back home throughout the week, each with similar stories. No money, nowhere to go. Parents who chose security over their children's safety. My cousin returned with his arm in a sling, claiming a skateboarding accident. Leo came back silent, his recording device mysteriously missing. Even brave little Sam was back, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his ribs. Friday night, Grandfather visited my room. He sat on my desk chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him, but no less dangerous. Your father tried this at your age, he said conversationally. Thought he could change things. Now look, he needs me for everything. Through my doorway, I could see my father hovering in the hall, shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm offering you a deal, Grandfather continued. Compete once more properly. Show the family you understand your place. Then you can quit. I'll even pay for college. But this rebellion ends tomorrow. His face darkened. Then watch what happens to Leo tomorrow. And it will be your fault. Saturday arrived with storm clouds gathering overhead. They locked me in my room during the culling preparations. But I could hear everything through the floor. The clinking of glasses. The men's voices placing bets. The nervous laughter of kids trying to seem brave. Then Leo's scream started, different from the usual sounds of defeat. This was pure agony. I threw myself against the door, ramming my shoulder into it until the handle broke. Racing downstairs, I found wine pooling under the cellar door. Inside was chaos. Leo lay unconscious on the concrete, a mixture of wine and blood flowing from a head wound. The adult stood frozen, genuinely shocked. Grandfather had let the critique go too far, using Leo to make his point. My mother finally snapped. Enough, she screamed, pushing past Uncle David. Call 911 now. This ends tonight. The room split instantly. Some wives rushed to Leo's side, while others tried to silence my mother. Aunt Catherine was already dialing, tears streaming down her face. The ambulance arrived in minutes, paramedics loading Leo onto a gurney. Grandfather told them about a slip and fall accident, his voice steady and convincing. But the EMT, a young woman with keen eyes, noted the inconsistencies in the injury pattern. She made notes on her tablet, exchanging glances with her partner. 40 minutes later, after the sirens and the frantic ride to the hospital, I cornered a nurse named Patricia and told her everything. She listened carefully, documenting every word, but her expression grew sympathetic rather than hopeful. Without the victim's cooperation, it's just hearsay, she explained gently. If Leo confirms your grandfather's story. He did. When Leo woke, his parents hovering nearby, he looked directly at the doctor and said he'd slipped on some spilled wine. But he squeezed my hand when no one was looking, an apology in his grip. Patricia showed me something that made my blood run cold. The hospital's computer system had records of cousin after cousin coming in over the years. Broken noses, cracked ribs, concussions, all explained away individually, but together they painted a clear pattern. I see what this is, Patricia said quietly. But I need a family member over 18 to make an official report. Someone with standing. In the hospital waiting room, my mother wavered. Maybe now, she began, but my father cut her off with a look, reminding her of our sisters' futures, their dependence on grandfather's money. I returned home to find my belongings piled on the front lawn. Grandfather stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You're no longer welcome in this house, he announced. But legally, I can't kick out a minor. You'll sleep in the cellar. The cellar still reeked of wine and fear. The tasting table remained, stained darker in places. I made a bed from old moving blankets in the corner, trying not to think about all the violence these walls had witnessed. While cleaning, I found a tooth wedged between two floorboards. Monday morning, the school counselor called me in. Mrs. Vance sat behind her desk, hands folded, concern painted across her face. Your grandfather called. He's worried about your mental health. These accusations you've been making. Mandatory therapy sessions started that week. Dr. Brennan's office was expensively furnished, all leather and dark wood. He listened to my story with professional interest, making notes that I knew would paint me as delusional. Your grandfather is paying for these sessions, he revealed during our third meeting. He wants what's best for you. Sometimes trauma can make us misremember events, create false narratives. I realized then what was happening. Every word I spoke was being documented as evidence of my instability. Grandfather was building a case that I was mentally ill, ensuring no one would believe me. The next Saturday, I tried to record the culling from my hiding spot in the cellar rafters. Daniel caught me, crushing my phone under his boot while the other cousins watched. None of them helped. They'd learned the price of defiance. Without a phone, I started handwriting everything in a journal, documenting dates, injuries, participants. I hid it in my locker at school, thinking it was safe. But the janitor found it during routine cleaning and, following protocol, turned it in to the principal. Principal Thompson called a family meeting about the disturbing fantasies in my journal. Grandfather sat in the office, shaking his head sadly as the principal expressed concern about my violent imagination and false memories. Even my friend Chloe's parents grew concerned when grandfather sent them Dr. Brennan's preliminary assessment. Maybe you do need help, Chloe's mother suggested gently when I tried to stay at their house. These delusions seemed serious. Desperate, I went to the local newspaper. The editor, Mr. Garrison, listened politely as I laid out my story. He took notes, asked questions, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. This is a serious accusation, he said finally. We need proof, corroboration. Without that, it's just hearsay, and frankly, accusing a respected community elder of something this heinous. I returned home to find grandfather had been busy. The few remaining winning vintages were gone, leaving empty spaces on shelves and walls. The family was erasing its violent history in real time, removing any trace of evidence. Leo found me that night, sitting alone in the cellar. He looked exhausted, defeated. I never had recordings, he admitted. I lied to support your bluff. I thought it would work. Thought they'd stop. I'm sorry. The truth of our situation crystallized then. Grandfather's goal wasn't just about winning. It was about control. Complete dominion until the kids turned 21 and left voluntarily, too broken to ever challenge the family hierarchy again. I had to survive 2 more years. I started documenting everything in hidden locations, using library computers to write accounts, storing notes in a locker at the bus station. Every piece of evidence carefully hidden where the family couldn't reach. To maintain my cover and avoid worse punishment, I was forced to attend the cullings as an observer. I sat on an overturned barrel in the corner, watching cousins shame each other while I took mental notes. The younger boys had started shunning me, grandfather's propaganda taking root in fresh minds. One small victory came when I convinced 2 mothers to schedule their sons' activities during culling nights. Music lessons and soccer practice became shields. But grandfather noticed a pattern within weeks and began scheduling the cullings randomly. Sunday mornings, Wednesday evenings, whenever it suited him. My father finally spoke to me privately one evening, catching me alone in the cellar. He looked older than his years, worn down by decades of submission. I'm saving money, he whispered, glancing nervously at the door. When you turn 21, I'll help you leave. Just survive until then. But surviving meant watching 16-year-olds enter the cellar. It meant seeing kids I try to protect learn to embrace the cruelty. Some cousins now practice their winemaking voluntarily, fully indoctrinated into the system. My carefully hidden documentation was discovered when my aunt cleaned the library during a volunteer shift. She destroyed everything to protect the family. She later told me her own son was approaching culling age, and she couldn't risk the tradition ending. Alliances shifted constantly as younger boys reached 16. Some embraced the tradition, seeing it as a path to grandfather's approval. Others approached me secretly, begging for help I couldn't give. Daniel shocked everyone when he broke. The toughest competitor in our generation, he pulled me aside one night, exhaustion written across his face. I'm tired of hurting cousins, he admitted. but I'm in too deep to quit now. Together, we created a new evidence cache, using Daniel's inside knowledge to document everything. We hid it in an abandoned building near the railroad tracks, a place where I sometimes slept to avoid the cellar's oppressive atmosphere. 3 mothers instituted family dinners on culling nights, giving their sons excuses to miss. Grandfather retaliated by moving the cullings to Sunday mornings, adapting his tradition to maintain control. The younger cousin's transformation hurt most. Boys who once played together now practiced their techniques voluntarily, believing grandfather's rhetoric about strength and tradition. The indoctrination was complete for many of them. Then came the breakthrough. Miguel, the 8-year-old who'd filmed that first night, had kept recording secretly. He showed me clear video of grandfather himself berating a losing cousin, calling him worthless as he poured the boys wine onto the ground. But the video included me in the frame, watching without intervening. My complicity was apparent, even if forced. My mother found my evidence cache while following me one evening. She confronted me in the abandoned building, tears streaming down her gaunt face. "You'll destroy us all for your principles," she demanded. "I've been skipping meals to save money. Your sisters need their education, and you want to burn it all down?" I made a decision then. Survival over justice. I would wait until 21 to act, gathering evidence for the future rather than the present. The next culling night, grandfather forced me to serve the winning wine, a bitter vintage made by a cousin who had sabotaged his own brother. I stood in the cellar, pouring wine, fully complicit in the system I'd tried to destroy. Grandfather smiled from his chair, knowing he'd won this round. Leo had recovered, but changed. The head injury left him with periodic headaches. But something else had shifted, too. He pulled me aside one night, whispering urgently, "I'm recording everything now. Really recording. For when we're older, when we can actually do something." A network formed quietly, cousins documenting in secret, planning for a future reckoning. The resistance had gone underground, more careful but not defeated. As my 21st birthday approached, grandfather made an announcement that sent ice through my veins. "Our prodigal daughter will have one final lesson," he declared at dinner. "On her birthday, she competes. Then she can leave with my blessing or stay with my respect." The implications were clear. One last humiliation, one final breaking, and then I'd be free to leave if I could still walk away. The cousins whispered about who my opponent would be. Some thought Daniel, despite our recent alliance. Others suspected grandfather would import someone from another branch of the family, someone without our shared history. But I knew better. I'd seen how grandfather operated, how he twisted loyalty into weapons. It would be Isabella. My first opponent would be my last, the circle closing with poetic cruelty. And Isabella, now fully indoctrinated, would compete to truly hurt me. The girl who'd once stood beside me, terrified, had become grandfather's perfect soldier. The evidence we'd gathered sat in various hiding spots around town. Digital files on library computers, physical documents in bus station lockers, videos on old phones hidden in abandoned buildings. A scattered archive of violence waiting for the right moment. But that moment felt impossibly far away as I sat in the cellar, listening to the latest culling through the walls. The pop of a cork, the cheers of men reliving their own brutal youths, the silence of mothers who'd chosen security over their children's safety. 2 more months until my birthday. 2 more months of watching, documenting, surviving. 2 more months of being complicit in the very system I tried to destroy. The tasting table waited, patient and hungry, ready for one last judgment. Sunday morning arrived with grandfather's new schedule. I watched from the cellar doorway as mothers hurried their sons past, claiming urgent church obligations. 3 families managed to avoid the morning culling, but grandfather's eyes tracked each absence with cold calculation. Daniel cornered me behind the tool shed afterward. His knuckles were raw from demonstrating techniques on the younger boys. "Your birthday's in 6 weeks," he said, checking over his shoulder. "Isabella has been training extra. Grandfather's been coaching her personally." The following week, grandfather instituted surprise inspections. He'd appear at music lessons, soccer practices, even school events, ensuring his grandsons weren't hiding behind manufactured excuses. Mrs. Chen's piano recital got canceled when grandfather showed up, demanding her students return for family obligations. I spent nights at the abandoned building, adding to our evidence cache. Daniel brought photos of medical records he'd stolen from his mother's filing cabinet. Years of emergency room visits, all carefully documented. We wrapped everything in plastic, hiding it beneath rotting floorboards. Two cousins approached me separately that week. 12-year-old Marcus, whose culling debut was approaching, begged for the sabotage trick. I had to explain why it wouldn't work anymore, watching hope drain from his face. 8-year-old Carlos just wanted to know if the hunger for approval would stop hurting eventually. I lied and said yes. Grandfather announced a new rule at the next culling. Winners would now be celebrated in front of the entire extended family, not just their opponents. He wanted the mothers to see their exiled children's empty chairs, to understand the price of defiance. My Aunt Maria lasted 10 minutes before breaking down, shoving her own plate toward her defeated son's empty seat. Grandfather banned her from the next 3 dinners. Leo's headaches worsened during a particularly brutal culling between two 14-year-olds. He collapsed in the cellar, clutching his skull. The family doctor, grandfather's golf buddy, prescribed pain medication and suggested less stress. Nobody mentioned the obvious cause. I discovered grandfather had been visiting my school counselor weekly, providing updates on my mental state. Mrs. Vance now looked at me with pity rather than concern, fully convinced I was delusional. My teachers received copies of Dr. Brennan's reports, painting me as a troubled teen with violent fantasies and false memories. Daniel's breaking point came 3 weeks before my birthday. Forced to compete against his younger brother, he refused to present his wine for judgment. Both boys were shamed. That night, Daniel packed a bag and disappeared. His parents filed a missing person report, but I knew he'd made it to his girlfriend's family in Nevada. One less ally, but I was glad he'd escaped. The younger cousin's transformation accelerated. They formed practice groups, meeting after school to perfect their techniques. 10-year-old Diego boasted about the moves grandfather taught him privately. The tradition was evolving, becoming self-sustaining, even without the older generation's enforcement. These boys would continue the violence. My mother's weight loss became impossible to ignore. She'd given her portions to my sister so often that her clothes hung loose on her frame. When I confronted her, she simply said, 2 more weeks. Then you're free, and things will get easier. But we both knew grandfather would never let things get easier. Miguel's secret recordings multiplied. The 8-year-old had become our most valuable asset, his age making him invisible to the adults. He showed me footage of grandfather instructing the older boys on psychological warfare, how to break an opponent's spirit before the culling even began. But every video included other cousins' faces, implicating them in the system. Grandfather scheduled a family reunion for the week before my birthday. Cousins from other states would attend, including some who'd aged out of the culling years ago. The real purpose was clear: witnesses for my final humiliation. He wanted every branch of the family to see me broken. I tried one last time with the authorities. A different police station, a different detective. Detective Williams, a woman with kind eyes who listened to my entire story. She took notes, asked follow-up questions, even seemed to believe me. Then she made a call to check my background and discovered Dr. Brennan's reports. The interview ended with pamphlets for mental health resources. Leo developed a new strategy. During cullings, he positioned himself to accidentally interfere when things went too far. A stumbled step here, a knocked-over water bottle there, small disruptions that prevented serious injuries. Grandfather noticed, but couldn't prove intentionality. 3 weeks before my birthday, Isabella began her final preparations. I watched her in the cellar, practicing her presentation on the heavy table grandfather had installed. Her technique was flawless, brutal. The scared 16-year-old I'd first competed against had been replaced by a true believer. She caught me watching once and simply nodded, like an executioner acknowledging his condemned. My father's savings plan hit a snag. Grandfather, suspicious of everyone now, had tightened control over the family finances. Bank statements arrived at his house first. Any unusual withdrawals got questioned. My father managed to hide $300 in cash, nowhere near enough for escape. The family reunion arrived with cousins I hadn't seen in years. Men in their 20s and 30s, bearing old scars from their culling days. They shared stories of their glory years, comparing techniques, laughing about the hunger. Not one of them spoke against the tradition. They've been broken and rebuilt in grandfather's image. Grandfather made a spectacle of announcing my birthday, culling in front of 40 relatives. He declared it would be held at sunset, when warriors prove themselves. Isabella stood beside him, already wearing her competition clothes. The message was clear. This wasn't just about tradition anymore. It was about crushing rebellion completely. That night, I met with Leo and the few cousins still secretly resisting. We had evidence, but no way to use it without destroying our family's financial stability. Miguel's videos, Daniel's photos, my documentation, all useless against grandfather's economic stranglehold. We were trapped between justice and survival. My 21st birthday dawned gray and humid. Extended family filled the house, their excitement palpable. Uncles who'd moved away returned to witness the spectacle. Cousins filmed everything on their phones, creating their own documentation of tradition's continuation. The cellar had been decorated with banners reading "Strength through struggle" and "Brotherhood bonds." Someone had repainted the tasting table, making it wider to accommodate the expected violence. Folding chairs lined the walls for the audience. This wasn't just a competition. It was a ceremony. Isabella warmed up in the corner, her focus absolute. Grandfather had given her new glasses, lighter ones that would cut easier. Every detail had been planned to ensure maximum damage. Uncle David tested the cellar door, making sure it would lock properly. No escapes this time. I made one last check of our evidence cache at the abandoned building. Everything remained hidden, waiting for someday. Maybe when the younger cousins grew up, when grandfather's grip loosened with age. Or maybe it would rot there forever, a monument to failed resistance. The extended family gathered as sunset approached. Mothers held their younger children close, whispering explanations about family tradition. The men formed their usual circle, but larger now, 3 rows deep. Grandfather sat in a special chair, elevated to see over the crowd. His cold eyes caught the overhead light as he smiled. "Tonight, we remind everyone what happens to those who challenge family," Grandfather announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Isabella has trained hard. She understands honor. She will teach a necessary lesson." They locked the cellar door from the inside. No one would leave until the loser was declared. I stood at the table, feeling the weight of 40 relatives' expectations. Isabella entered from the opposite side, her vintage ready, poised to destroy what remained of our childhood friendship. The culling began without ceremony. Isabella attacked immediately, her critique of my wine a combination of techniques grandfather had drilled into her for weeks. I dodged, blocked, refused to engage. The crowd grew restless. Someone shouted for a decision. Others demanded action. Isabella's frustration built with each point I conceded. She prepared for war, but found only evasion. Her attacks grew wilder, more desperate. Grandfather's training couldn't account for an opponent who wouldn't fight back. The careful choreography collapsed into chaos. Then Leo acted. During a particularly vicious critique from Isabella, Leo accidentally knocked over the water table. The crash distracted everyone momentarily. Isabella slipped on the wet concrete, going down hard. Her elbow split on impact, blood flowing freely. The cellar erupted in confusion. Technically, blood had hit concrete, but from a fall, not a competition. Grandfather stood, face purple with rage. But the rules were the rules. The culling was over. Isabella lay on the concrete, staring at her bleeding elbow in shock. I helped her up, whispering an apology she didn't acknowledge. The crowd dispersed uncertainly, robbed of their spectacle. Grandfather's perfect ceremony had collapsed into farce. At dinner, I ate while Isabella sat with an empty plate, her arm bandaged. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Grandfather's chosen warrior, defeated by clumsiness. The meal passed in tense silence. Tradition fulfilled, but somehow broken. That night, Grandfather summoned me to his study. He sat behind his desk, looking every one of his 78 years. For the first time, his hand shook without fear to hide it. "You won without winning," he said finally. "Get out. Take nothing. Never come back."